The title of this paper is Islamic Law as Personal Cultivation. I will just read the outline or the abstract for this paper. There are many ways to understand Islamic law in the global age. Very often in Western media and academia, it is portrayed as being a crude and regressive, even barbaric law. It is often understood as being little more than a primitive system of repression, especially in regard to the treatment of women. But there are many problems with this portrayal, not the least of which is that the Sharia is held to be valid and humane, even sacred, by more than 1/4 the population of the earth. Its influence rivals the combined influence of the two Western methods of law, civilian and Anglophone. However, there is a fundamental defect in the entire premise of such a discussion. That is, whether it is appropriate and useful to discuss the Islamic Sharia as if it is a system of law comparable with its two Western counterparts. In fact, those who are expert on the topic question whether the Sharia is even a system of law in the Western sense, or whether it is something entirely different. The purpose of this paper is to attempt an understanding of the Sharia by a different approach. The word Sharia, after all, is usually translated as meaning the way or the way of living. Its purpose is not to train a juridic stratum to impose order by a rule of authority descending from the top. Instead, it is intended to be a way of life taught to all persons in a way that order among them might arise, as it were, from the bottom up. There are three ways in which the difference between Western and Islamic practice is obvious. First, the Sharia is not territorial law in the way Western law extends its rule over defined territories and polities. Instead, it is what in the West is called a law of personality. It is in effect a pattern for life carried by each individual person who has embraced its principles. Each Muslim carries that code of behavior with him or herself and participates in its application. Second, unlike Western practice, the Sharia does not promise freedom. Instead, it requires obligation. The Western approach is built on a framework of authority that sets limits on behavior and wields the coercive power to enforce those limits. Within the prescribed limits, each person has maximum latitude to act as they wish, so long as they do not disturb the frame of authority. By contrast, the Islamic method of order is diffused among the population. It rests on an obligation of each person to sustain order. Finally, the Sharia is not a system of rule. It might be called a regimen of self-rule. The assumption is that those who are trained in correct principles will effectively govern themselves. The need for coercive authority will only be incidental to normal life. For these reasons, the Sharia, rather than being a system of law, could more accurately be viewed as a regime of personal cultivation.